Welcome, weary traveler. Settle in. Let your breath slow and your thoughts soften, like candlelight flickering on ancient stone walls. Tonight, we drift far from the present, letting go of the noise of modern life, the glowing screens, the hurried pace. Instead, we return to a time long past, a time when cities did not hum with electricity but echoed with the clatter of hooves and the creak of wooden carts. You're about to step into the cobbled, crooked streets of a medieval city. Perhaps you've imagined it before: noble knights on horseback, tall towers looming in the mist, and bustling markets rich with the scent of spiced wine. But tonight, we will leave behind the shining myths. You are not a noble or a knight. You are a cobbler. It was dense, pungent, and ceaseless. The rhythm of their lives was not set by choice, but by necessity. Not with haste, not with drama, but with soft steps, careful detail, and just enough intrigue to carry your mind gently through the past. By trade, by hunger, by custom, and above all, by survival. We'll slip into the shadows and back alleys, the working stalls and cramped lofts, the places most stories forget to visit. Because in truth, life in a medieval city was anything but romantic. So as you lie still, eyes gently closed or just beginning to flutter, allow me to guide you through the true texture of medieval city life. Let us begin with something simple: your job. And your day is just beginning. Imagine, if you will, the pale blue light of early morning slipping through the gaps in a shuttered window. The chill in the air bites at your fingertips, even beneath a thin wool blanket. It is the year 1327. Every soul in this city walks on feet that must be shod poor or rich, clergy or merchant, soldier or servant, and it is your job to fashion, mend, and patch the shoes that hold their weight. There is no fireplace in the small room above your workshop, only the scent of old leather and damp wood rising from the floor below. Already, before sunrise, you begin your day. There is no breakfast waiting for you, just a rough hunk of bread, possibly softened in watered ale if you're lucky. The street outside is a narrow one, lined with timber-framed buildings that lean inward like gossiping neighbors. The gutters overflow with slop from chamber pots and kitchen waste. There is no sewage system, only gravity and luck. The shoes must be finished by dusk. Candles are dear, and oil lamps even more so. When darkness falls, your day is over, not by choice, but by limitation. There are no clocks, of course. Time is measured by the light, and the church bells, and the rhythm of labor. The cobbler's life is not one of glory or comfort. It is, in many ways, invisible, but it is steady, it is humble, and in the medieval city, it is enough. You are a cobbler in medieval Paris. A pattern, a kind of quiet pride in creation, even when the work goes unnoticed. You lie down on your straw mattress, curl your aching limbs beneath a threadbare blanket, and sleep ready to begin again with the morning bell. The shoes you make will walk the winding roads of the city tomorrow. A constant struggle. A quiet craft. A city beneath your feet, and yet, far above you. Perhaps into the market, perhaps into a cathedral, perhaps beyond the gates. Your work is not glamorous. It is not noble. But it is essential. Binding cracked uppers, you sit low to the ground, bent over your work, often in silence. There is no music, no idle talk, just the sound of the street beyond your door, the clatter of hooves, the cries of street vendors, the distant toll of bells from not. Scraps of leather cling to every surface like dead leaves. Your tools and all, a bone-handled knife, heavy thread are laid out with care. Still, others bring in shoes infested with lice or soaked in things you'd rather not identify. You take their coin if they offer it, and do the work, because that is how the city runs. One task, one trade, one day at a time. They are expensive to replace, and so you guard them as one would treasure a jewel. Your hands are calloused, stiff from years of stitching and hammering. Downstairs, the workshop smells of tanned hides and old sweat. The work is slow, repetitive. Stitching soles, reshaping heels. The floor is always cold, always damp. Mud is tracked in daily. The customers are not always kind. Some haggle aggressively. Others simply leave and never return to pay. Lunch is taken standing, perhaps a bit of dried fish and a sour onion. There's no pause, no break. The ache in your back becomes a companion, as constant as the smell of leather. Yet for all its hardship, there is a strange rhythm to this life. And as the stars rise above the rooftops and the city slowly sinks into its smoky hush, you return to your narrow loft. This is the rhythm of your life. Reform, fire, and fear in the early 1400s. Let us now move beyond the muddy streets of Paris, drifting quietly eastward, over the forests of the Holy Roman Empire, past snow-dusted mountains, across slow-flowing rivers. We arrive in the city of Prague. The year is 1414, and here we meet a man named Jan Hus. Jan was not born into greatness. He was born in a modest village in southern Bohemia, and his early life, like so many others, was shaped by silence, obedience, and religion. In time, he would become a scholar, a preacher, and, eventually, a martyr. Of voices echoing in Latin prayer, the Church, at this time, was the single most powerful institution in Europe. He urged the people of Prague to live by the teachings of Scripture, not by the whims of priests. He admired the writings of an Englishman, John Wycliffe, who had suggested that the Bible should be read in the common tongue, and that the Pope was not infallible. He taught at the university, wore humble robes, and avoided unnecessary conflict. And yet, the more he spoke, the more his words gathered weight. It guided lives, punished sins, and crowned kings. But it was also deeply trouble-riddled with corruption, hypocrisy, and politics. His world was one of flickering candlelight in vaulted cathedrals, of parchment and ink. Jan Hus saw this, and he began to speak. At first, his sermons were simple. He spoke of Christ, of humility, of truth. He spent months in prison, cold, damp, and forgotten, for daring to suggest that Scripture held more authority than the Church, for daring to speak truth where silence was safer. His health declined, but his resolve did not. He refused to recant his teachings, even when offered his freedom. These were radical ideas, but Hus was no fiery revolutionary. His voice was calm, his words deliberate. He denounced indulgences, the practice of paying the Church for forgiveness, and they did not approve. He criticized the immorality of the clergy. He urged reform, not rebellion. He preached from the Bethlehem chapel, where thousands came to listen. A generation later, Martin Luther would draw on Hus's teachings. Entire movements would rise from the ashes of his words, and centuries, until we find ourselves standing once more in a city familiar, yet changed. Reform would come but slowly, painfully, and not without cost. Still, those in power listened closely, not in the smoke of martyrdom, but in the echo of his quiet defiance. In 1414, Hus was summoned to a church council in the city of Constance. He was promised safe conduct, protection, a chance to explain himself before church authorities. He accepted, and he never returned home. When he arrived in Constance, he was quickly arrested. At his trial, Hus stood alone, surrounded by powerful men in robes and chains of gold. And so, on July 6, 1415, Jan Hus was led to a field outside the city walls. There was no crowd of admirers, only a stake, a pile of wood, and a final chance to remain silent. He did not take it. Witnesses say he prayed aloud as the flames rose, that his final words were, "In truth, I die for the gospel." There is no need to imagine the fire itself, no need to linger on the suffering. What matters is the silence that followed. But history did not forget Jan Hus. Though he died alone, his ideas lived on. For now, we leave Jan behind, a single voice, raised in a dangerous time. And as we turn away from that solemn hillside, the soft wind carries us onward. Over fields the candles flicker, the bells toll. And beneath the stone streets of London, something waits, buried deep in the ground. A quiet archaeological horror. The air is still now, as we drift from the embers of Jan Hus's final hour into a deeper, colder silence. You are standing in London, but not the London of today, with its bridges and buses and bright, humming life. No, this is a quieter place. The year is 1349, and London is dying. There is no thunder, no warfare, no fire in the skies. Only the slow, invisible spread of something that does not announce itself until it is far too late. The Black Death. By this point in the 14th century, London is already a city of some consequence. Its streets are narrow and often blocked by carts. The Thames flows steadily past, wide and muddy, giving and taking life as it always has. People live close, in wooden houses packed together like crates, with roofs of thatch and alleys just wide enough to walk Instead, let us focus on what came afterward, the ground beneath your feet. It arrived on ships, carried in the fleas of rats, which in turn traveled in bundles of wool and sacks of grain. Churchyards overflowed. The bell ringers could not keep up. The priests stopped coming, and the bodies kept coming. When they were covered, they were forgotten, or rather, ignored. London moved on. Life resumed. In 1986, beneath a square in 2013, under a train station being refurbished, bones rose of them, neatly stacked, mostly unmarked, mostly unnamed. It spread by touch, by breath, by presence, not with shovels, but with brushes and gloved hands. No marker, no memory, just the knowledge, tucked deep in the city's soil, that once, nearly everything stopped. They catalogued what the dead could still teach us. Diet. It reshaped the population of Europe. The plague moves silently through these corridors. At first, they called it pestilence. It had many names, none of them calming. Something a bit warmer, a bit stranger. The tables are being set. The torches are being lit. The fire crackles in a stone hearth. There is no need to describe its symptoms here. You may already know them. They are not what we will dwell on. Some right within the city itself under what are now quiet courtyards, schools, and office buildings. It mutters, it rebuilds, it forgets, and it remembers. When the deaths began, they seemed manageable. A few here, a few there. But soon, the numbers grew too rapidly, so the city did what it could. They dug. Sometimes, the gravediggers collapsed from exhaustion or illness before the pits were full. Huge pits were carved into the earth hastily and in silence, some in the outer fields, some in old, disused cemeteries. The pits were deep, perhaps 12 feet, maybe more, wide enough to hold dozens, then hundreds. There was no time for coffins, little time for prayers. These plague pits, as they're now called, were not monuments. They were practical, grim necessities. But the past does not remain buried forever. Centuries later, as the city rebuilt itself again and again, workers would sometimes strike something unexpected beneath the soil. Archaeologists entered these pits gently. And even now, as you walk through modern London, if you ever do, you might pass unknowingly over one of these quiet graves. Yet the city did not die. There is something comforting in that. Life, even in the face of horror, continues. And as we step softly away from those long-buried bones, we turn now towards something more vivid. Because somewhere, behind thick wooden doors, the nobility are preparing for dinner. What aristocrats ate, and how strange it truly was. The great hall is quiet. For now, before the guests arrive, the room lies in waiting. You can hear the low crackle of logs in a wide stone hearth, the soft scuffing of servants' feet on rush-covered floors, and the distant clatter of dishes being arranged somewhere behind thick wooden walls, of conspicuous wealth, displayed not just in silks or silver, but in something more. The air is warmer than in most places within a medieval city carried by the fire and thick tapestries that line the walls, woven with threads dyed in deep reds and faded gold. And though the ingredients were often bland by modern standards, the effort put into appearance, abundance, and structure was nothing short of theatrical. You are a guest, tonight, in the world of the nobility. These are not meant to be eaten by the guests, but rather serve as makeshift dinnerware later given to the poor or to pigs. Perhaps it has been passed down through generations. It is stained in places, but still serviceable. They were a sign of trade connections, of money, of importance. The guests enter slowly, men, in tunics embroidered with family crests, women in headdresses shaped like steeples or butterfly wings, a custard made of eggs, honey, and marrow. Sugar is rare and expensive. Butter is considered common, fit for peasants. Wine, often sour or watered down, flows constantly, though ale may also appear, particularly in English halls. A small string ensemble, tucked away behind a screen, plucks at lutes and rabecks to announce the opening of the meal. We are no longer among cobblers or gravediggers. This is a place of status, of protocol. The benches are hard, the halls are draughty. There are no forks, only knives and fingers. Napkins are large cloths shed between pairs. The smell of the food mingles with smoke, sweat, and the faintly musty scent of old stone. Where you sit, what you are served, how you are spoken to, it all depends on your position within the feudal web. Beneath the surface of luxury lay illness, superstition, and the limitations of the time. Feasting was not merely about nourishment in noble circles. It was ritual, display, symbol, one far less decorated, and far more practical. Perhaps a juggler performs between courses, or a small choir of boys sing softly from the gallery above. So let us take our place near the rear of the hall, out of the way. but close enough to observe and watch as the feast begins. The bread trenchers, now soggy, are stacked for redistribution. The floor is swept. The fire dies down to embers. Some retire to their chambers. Others remain to talk politics or arrange marriages. A few slip out into the cold night air, lanterns swaying, cloaks drawn tight. A peacock, its iridescent neck propped upright, tail fanned wide, but the meat within dry and barely palatable. A long wooden table stretches the length of the room, covered with a linen cloth. Now the food begins to arrive, dish by dish, carried carefully by servants who do not speak unless addressed. First, trenchers stale rounds of bread, used as plates, porous and tough. It was a way of being seen, of asserting one's place in a delicate, hierarchical world. And for those who could afford it, it was also a brief escape from the discomforts of everyday life. Then come the more decorative offerings. A swan, roasted whole, its feathers cleaned and carefully reattached for effect. Dishes are perfumed with rosewater and spicy expensive imports like cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and saffron. These were not everyday flavors. The guests dine on rabbit stewed in almond milk, pies stuffed with songbirds, boiled eels, and jellied fish. Most of the food is heavily salted, not only for taste, but for preservation. Conversation is formal, quiet. Everything is dictated by rank, and while the meal may seem lavish, there is little in the way of comfort. Still, there is pageantry. Torchlight flickers against golden goblets. Musicians strike a gentle tune. When the final course is cleared apart, perhaps candied fruit or wafers dipped in spiced wine, the guests slowly rise, and the whole, once so full, slowly empties again. Servants moving quietly to clear the remains. Feasting, you see, was not only a matter of eating, but even in this display of wealth, the medieval world was never far from hardship. Which brings us, gently now, to our next subject, because even nobles, no matter how richly dressed, must at some point use the facilities. And in a medieval city, that was no simple matter. Chamber pots, privers, and public shame. Now, take a breath, a long, slow breath, because our journey takes a humbler turn. We're not standing in the great hall anymore, or walking among saints and scholars. We're in the alleyways now, or perhaps tucked in a cramped upper room, or even perched, precariously, over a canal. Because no matter your status, no matter your silks or sores, in the medieval city, eventually, everyone must relieve themselves. But there are no flush toilets here, no privacy as we know it, no scented soaps or porcelain bowls. The concept of a bathroom clean, quiet, personal ease, a modern one. This was your bathroom. And in the cold of night, when the city was asleep, and the streets are dark or too dangerous to wander, this humble vessel was your closest ally. In the cities of medieval Europe, sanitation was communal, chaotic, and at times unimaginable by today's standards. If you were thoughtful, you'd carry it carefully down the stairs and out to the street. But often, it was simply tipped from a window, its contents splashing into the alley below with a call of warning. Let's begin with the most common fixture, the chamber pot. Children, adults, and in summer, insects multiplied with alarming speed. Some garderobes were vented, using simple stone chimneys to carry the smell up and out. Others simply lingered guests, but they were communal and rarely private. Disease spread easily, so did gossip. People did not know of bacteria or waterborne illness. They relied on smell as a warning, and believed that foul air miasma was the true danger. As such, streets might be swept with herbs, and walls whitewashed with lime, but the underlying systems remained the same. All relied on it. Rivers like the Thames or the Seine carried away the evidence, and brought with them a host of problems in return. Sometimes even small children, barefoot, playing in places we would now consider unspeakable. In your home, be it a cobbler's loft or a merchant's townhouse, you would keep a ceramic pot tucked beneath the bed or stored discreetly in a corner. A daily ritual, repeated over and over, across rooftops and stairwells, gutters, a shared truth in a world where even the most basic needs were met with improvisation. It was used quietly, without fuss. But of course, what goes in must go somewhere. So come morning, or sometimes earlier, the pot was emptied. Gardeloo, some cried in the northern cities, beware the water. They shouted, though it was rarely water at all. Now imagine the street, narrow, cobbled, and lined with overhangs and jettied buildings. Waste from dozens of homes running in shallow gutters, mingling with kitchen scraps, rainwater, and the detritus of daily life. It was not uncommon to see pigs, chickens, or dogs nosing through it. For wealthier homes or noble estates there might be a garderobe, a small stone room built high into the wall, with a wooden seat above a shaft that dropped straight down, often into the moat or a cesspit below. But even these were rarely cleaned. The smell clung to the walls. Public latrines did exist in some larger towns, often near rivers or behind inns. There were simple structures, wooden benches, overflowing water, and of course, sanitation was not well understood. Waste, in many places, simply flowed into the nearest water source. Yet, for all its discomfort, the system worked just enough for the city to survive. There is a kind of strange rhythm to it, once you accept the reality, and so, we step back now, leaving behind the scent of lie and line, and turn instead toward another equally sobering reality of medieval life. What happens when the smallest injury becomes something far more dangerous? Because in the cities of the Middle Ages, healing was uncertain. Medicine, or the lack of it. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself working in your small stall. You are carving wood, slicing leather, chopping onions for the evening meal. And then, it happens. A slip, a shallow cut across your palm. It stings, it bleeds, but you wipe it clean with a rag and move on. Today, it would be little more than a nuisance. A bandage, some soap, a little sting of antiseptic, and forgotten by nightfall. But here, in the medieval city, that small wound could be the beginning of the end. But soap was not always used, and water could be worse than helpful. Sometimes, salves were applied, made from herbs, ashes, or animal fat. Some believed that placing spiderwebs on the wound would draw out the poison. Others whispered prayers to saints of healing and touched relics with hope. It was not the size of the wound that mattered, but what came afterward. Honey, in truth, could sometimes help, but these remedies were passed on slowly, inconsistently, and often superstition mingled with medicine until the two could not be untangled. Because healing was never a guarantee, they sought not only healers, but astrologers, priests, and alchemists. They did not separate science from spirit because, to them, there was no division. Others carried their wounds for life, stiff hands, twisted limbs, clouded eyes. They could lance, stitch, and sometimes amputate, though the tools were rudimentary and the pain immense. There were no anesthetics, only cloth to bite and the hope that the fever would not come to announce, to witness what others would rather not see. Of luck, of timing, of faith. Physicians spoke of humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Health, they believed, was a matter of balance between these. They only knew the signs, the trembling, the heat, the dreams, and, more often than not, the silence that followed, and the city continues its rhythm, unaware. A fever was not an infection, it was excess heat. A cough might be a disturbance of moisture in the lungs. The understanding of the human body was limited, filtered through ancient Greek texts and centuries of tradition. And as for that cut on your hand, there were many ways to treat it. Few were effective. You might tie a strip of cloth around it clean, if you were lucky. The barber surgeons, often the most skilled with blades, were more practical. The body turned against itself, the skin grew hard, the lymph swelled, and within days, the infection might spread through the bloodstream. Because once the wound began to swell, redden, or weep, you knew something darker was at work. There was a word for it, though not always spoken aloud: sepsis. But they didn't know it by that name. Even the wealthy could not escape this danger. Kings died from abscessed teeth, noblewomen from childbirth complications, soldiers from sword scratches. In monasteries, where learning endured, some monks kept detailed notes of treatments, infusions of rosemary, tinctures of honey and vinegar. Still, the human body is resilient. Many survived, some healed with crude scars. And perhaps the most dangerous part of all was belief, because people believed their illness might be punishment, or fate, or the influence of a distant star. And so, the small cut became a question of balance. We leave now the quiet corner where the wound was received, whether in a market stall or monastery garden. The pain fades. The fever passes, or it does not. But some within that city are never allowed to forget. Their job is to remember, because when death comes, someone must tell the town, shouting bad news and risking ridicule. In the quiet of the early morning, before the market begins to stir, A figure steps into the square, a bell clutched in one hand, a parchment in the other. His voice is his profession, and today, like every day, he will be heard. You are the town crier. Your job is simple in theory, but exhausting in practice. You are the voice of the authorities, the living broadcast system of the medieval city. The phrase is formulaic, yet familiar. Your voice must carry over the clatter of carts and the bark of dogs. You do not whisper. You declare. A few shout insults not at you directly, but at what you represent. Still, you carry on. In these moments, your delivery must be precise and come even as your own heart races. Your bell rings through narrow streets, and the people gather not always willingly. You post notices where you can, on church doors or wooden boards. If there's no one to post them, you repeat them, again and again, until memory takes hold. When a traveling troupe of players is granted permission to perform, you are the first to tell it. Children mimic you, shouting from doorways. Merchants offer you warm bread, and cobbler waves. A nod from the baker, small things but they make the hours pass. Darkness is coming, torches flicker along the walls. The city turns inward. You are, in a way, a servant to authority, though a few in power bother to treat you as one of their own. Your throat grows sore, but the day is not done. The townspeople may joke about your worn cloak and hoarse voice, yet, without you, no one knows what must be known. Perhaps it's a royal edict, perhaps a curfew has been set due to rumors of unrest, a break from the grinding routine, a burst of color and confusion, a street filled with both joy and danger. Or there's a proclamation of marriage from a wealthy family, a knight's tournament, a visiting bishop, or, more grimly, a coming execution. You begin. Here what you announce varies. People flinch as you approach. You speak of closures, of travel bans, of bodies found and carted away. And after each announcement, you wash your hands when water is available and pray that your role does not cost you your life. The crowd listens, or pretends to. Some scoff, others mutter. Your words have weight, but you are not powerful. You walk the same routes each day past, the butcher's stall, the chapo's steps, the bridge near the tanner's yard. Sometimes, your voice brings fear, a fire in the lower quarter, an outbreak of disease, a noble murder in the street. You are, too often, the bearer of sorrow. In plague years, your bell takes on a different tone, and yet, your job has moments of peculiar pride. When a great feast is announced, and the city gathers in joy, your voice carries laughter, your feet grow tired. At sunset, you climb the town gate and shout once more, declaring the end of trade. The closure of the city gates, the beginning of the curfew. You descend the steps alone, your voice echoing faintly behind you. And tomorrow, you will rise again, to speak, to ring, to be heard. From here, we move away from voices and proclamations, and turn instead to something more chaotic and unpredictable. The holy days. The bustling chaos of holy days. The bells toll, but not for church this time. Today is a feast day, one of many scattered throughout the medieval calendar. A saint's name is honored, a holy event commemorated, but for most people, it's a rare day of relief from toil. The stores that normally sell onions and rough bread have been joined by jugglers, peddlers, puppet shows, and sellers of dubious Imagine yourself stepping into the streets, the rhythm of your daily life. Children dart through the crowd, laughing and shouting, and even the sternest elders crack a rare smile. The air smells different, richer, unfamiliar. Roasted meats on spits, sweetened pastries, thick with honey, cider warming over open flames, bright fabrics, flap from windows, music thin, reedy, improvised drifts from corners where musicians strum and tap whatever instruments they can carry. Children trained from a young age to lift coin and bread without notice. Gangs of clever fingers, watching, brushing past, vanishing again. You hear a scuffle behind a tapestry store someone has noticed too late. All of it watched by those hoping to win, and those hoping to steal. A nobleman's servant shoves a beggar out of the way. A drunk soldier challenges a rival with a broken curb. A cart overturns. A shout, a shove, then a lull again. You move through it carefully. The city is transformed overnight into something almost enchanted. And yet, you keep one hand firmly on your pouch. You manage to keep your coin, or most of it, and you'll speak of the juggler, or the fool in the donkey mask, or the old woman who could sing like a bird, to remind people that they are still part of something larger. A city, a people, a rhythm that breathes in between the cold and the labor. They too have families, and full bellies make them slow. and life will continue. Some people linger, others stagger home, or are carried there. Perhaps, if you're young or desperate, you dream of rising above the grime and noise of the street. And those who walk it do not always emerge whole. Of learning a trade, of earning respect. The streets are dirtier than they were this morning. Bits of food, fragments of joy and trash, broken decorations underfoot, just as, if dispensed today, will likely be tomorrow's problem. Because festivals, as much as they are about joy, are also about opportunity, and not just for the honest. Pickpockets slip through the crowd like fish through water. The cries of vendors compete with the shrieks of laughter, the crack of whips in performance acts, and the booming voices of hawkers selling miracle cures and lucky charms. The watchmen patrol, but half-heartedly. Among the colorful chaos, there are competitions, mock duels, sack races, tests of strength. Ale flows freely, voices rise. Someone begins to sing an old folk song out of key, and others join in, unashamed. There are dice games in the alleyways, and card games in the corners of taverns. By mid-afternoon, the revelry is thicker than the morning fog. But beneath the surface, the tensions are always there. These holy days serve many purposes. They reaffirm faith, yes, but they also serve to release pressure. As dusk begins to fall, candles flicker and lanterns. You head home to. By morning, it will all be gone, and the carts will roll through again, and the fish will stink again. But the fare, that brief, mad shimmer, will live in your memory. And as you rest, you may begin to dream. But that path, too, is no easy one. Let us now walk with them, step by painful step. Medicine, or the lack of it. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself working in your small stall. You are carving wood, slicing leather, chopping onions for the evening meal. And then, it happens. A slip, a shallow cut across your palm. It stings, it bleeds, but you wipe it clean with a rag and move on. Today, it would be little more than a nuisance. A bandage, some soap, a little sting of antiseptic, and forgotten by nightfall. But here, in the medieval city, that small wound could be the beginning of the end. But soap was not always used, and water could be worse than helpful. Sometimes, salves were applied, made from herbs, ashes, or animal fat. Some believed that placing spiderwebs on the wound would draw out the poison. Others whispered prayers to saints of healing and touched relics with hope. It was not the size of the wound that mattered, but what came afterward. Honey, in truth, could sometimes help. But these remedies were passed on slowly, inconsistently, and often superstition mingled with medicine until the two could not be untangled. Because healing was never a guarantee, they sought not only healers, but astrologers, priests, and alchemists. They did not separate science from spirit because, to them, there was no division. Others carried their wounds for life-stiff hands, twisted limbs, clouded eyes. They could lance, stitch, and sometimes amputate, though the tools were rudimentary and the pain immense. There were no anesthetics, only cloth to bite, and the hope that the fever would not come. To announce, to witness what others would rather not see. Of luck, of timing, of faith. Physicians spoke of humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Health, they believed, was a matter of balance between these. They only knew the signs, the trembling, the heat, the dreams, and, more often than not, the silence that followed, and the city continues its rhythm, unaware. A fever was not an infection, it was excess heat. A cough might be a disturbance of moisture in the lungs. The understanding of the human body was limited, filtered through ancient Greek texts and centuries of tradition. And as for that cut on your hand, there were many ways to treat it. Few were effective. You might tie a strip of cloth around it clean, if you were lucky. The barber surgeons, often the most skilled with blades, were more practical. The body turned against itself, the skin grew hard, the lymph swelled, and within days, the infection might spread through the bloodstream. Because once the wound began to swell, redden, or weep, you knew something darker was at work. There was a word for it, though not always spoken aloud: sepsis. But they didn't know it by that name. Even the wealthy could not escape this danger. Kings died from abscessed teeth, noblewomen from childbirth complications, soldiers from sword scratches. In monasteries, where learning endured, some monks kept detailed notes of treatments, infusions of rosemary, tinctures of honey and vinegar. Still, the human body is resilient. Many survived, some healed with crude scars. And perhaps the most dangerous part of all was belief. because people believe their illness might be punishment, or fate, or the influence of a distant star. And so, the small cut became a question of balance. We leave now the quiet corner where the wound was received, whether in a market stall or monastery garden. The pain fades. The fever passes, or it does not. But some within that city are never allowed to forget. Their job is to remember, because when death comes, someone must tell the town. The strange piece of cloistered living. The door is heavy. It creaks softly as it closes behind you, and just like that, the outside world disappears. Imagine yourself in a stone building far from the city streets. The air is cool. Your feet echo faintly on flagstones, polished by countless barefoot steps. This is a monastery or a convent, depending on who you are now. You have renounced family, ambition, and even ownership of yourself. Here, life is governed by the rule. No pick. The first prayer of the Damitans pulls you from your straw mattress into the chapel. Candles flicker. Robes rustle. Voices chant not with passion, but with duty, merging into one layered sound. Neither sad nor joyful, just ... there. Just the steady rhythm of monastic life, perhaps the rule of Saint Benedict, or of Saint Augustine. Each order has its codes, but they share the same bones. Obedience, poverty, chastity, stability. There is a deep and purposeful quiet here. No bustling carts. No town criers. You rise before dawn, not with a jarring alarm, but with the soft toll of the bell. In some orders, silence is total, broken only for emergencies or blessings. Marginalia in books. Feast days are the only variation marked by special prayers, perhaps a sweeter meal, but every day, in its way, is the same. A total immersion in another kind of life, one without property, without vanity, without ambition, but also without fear of starvation, violence, or political chaos. Abbots grow powerful. Some orders hoard wealth. Reforms rise and fall. But in your daily life, the outer politics are distant murmurs. You sweep the chapel. You pull weeds. You ring the bell for terse, quiet reflections in journals. There is expression, just tempered, focused, inward. In others, there is a designated place to speak, softly, for a short time. You pray, perhaps out of belief, perhaps out of habit. There are 7 such prayer services each day. You move through them like tides, each calling you back to devotion, to humility, of the ways people endured, hoped, struggled, and occasionally found peace. Our journey through the medieval city, its reeking alleys, its chanting halls, its crowded squares, and silent cloisters, has come to its end. Between prayers, there is labor. A reader recites holy texts as you eat, lest your mind wander too far from the divine. Some mend clothes, prepare food, or tend to the sick in nearby villages. If you are a monk, you might copy manuscripts tracing careful letters with ink made from crushed oak galls. Your back aches, your eyes blur. You illuminate the margin with gold leaf, not for vanity, but to glorify God. Others tend gardens, cabbages, leeks, and onions. Chickens cluck behind wattle fences. Calendula for wounds, mint for the stomach, prayers for everything else. And the darkness settles around you. You feel a faint echo of their footsteps. If you are a nun, your work may also be medicinal. Herbal knowledge is preserved within the cloister walls. You eat in silence soups and dark bread, occasionally fish. Meat is rare, if allowed at all. Your voice is not entirely gone here, but it is surrendered. Conversation is restricted. And yet, people write. Time becomes strange. You forget the bustle of markets, the rhythm of secular days. For some, this is maddening. For others, it is liberating. A separation from worldly concerns. Of course, monastic life is not immune to corruption or hardship. And at night, after Complan, you return to your cell. You kneel. Then you sleep. Dreamless. The stone walls cold, but steady. And the world turns again, beyond your notice. Now, gently, we return to the present, and what remains. A deeper sense of the rhythms of life long past. You may never walk those streets in waking life, but now, perhaps, as your eyes grow heavy, thank you for traveling with me. Rest well, sleep deeply, and remember, the past is always there, waiting, quietly, just beneath the surface.